What if the version of yourself you've been running from your entire life isn't the monster you think it is? What if it's not broken, not wrong, not the thing that would ruin everything if you let it out? What if it's exactly what would save you? You've been told who to be since the day you were born. Be agreeable, be responsible, be the good one. And somewhere along the way, you learned that the parts of you that didn't fit, the assertive part, the angry part, the part that wanted more, demanded more, took up space, those parts were dangerous. So you buried them. But here's what Carl Jung discovered about the human psyche. It doesn't let you stay lopsided forever. There's a force inside you, deeper than your conscious mind, that's constantly working toward balance. Jung called it the self. And when you've lived too long on one side, too passive, too agreeable, too controlled, the self begins to demand the opposite. If you've spent your life being endlessly nice, your psyche will eventually insist you learn how to say no, how to be firm, how to protect your boundaries. And at first, that feels like cruelty. It feels like selfishness. It feels like becoming the very person you swore you'd never be. But that's not what's actually happening. What's happening is your soul is prescribing you the exact medicine you need to become whole. The psyche self-regulates through what Jung called enantiodromia, the principle that things turn into their opposites when they've been pushed too far in one direction. Your extreme agreeableness demands assertiveness. Your rigid control demands spontaneity. Your endless performance demands raw, unfiltered truth. The person you fear to become isn't a monster. It's the missing half of your potential. It's not the energy of destruction. It's the stored energy of your suppressed destiny, waiting for you to finally stop performing and start living. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about reclaiming the part of you that was exiled so long ago, you forgot it was ever yours. And that journey, the one toward the self you fear, is the only path to the wholeness you've been aching for in every quiet moment when the mask finally comes off. Let's begin. The fragmentation didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, silently, starting the moment you realized that some versions of you got rewarded and others got punished. You cried too loud as a child, and someone told you to stop being so dramatic. You got angry, and the room went cold. You wanted something fiercely, and you were told that wasn't appropriate. And in that moment, something inside you made a calculation. If I want to be loved, if I want to stay safe, I have to cut this part out. So you did. You performed what Jung would recognize as a surgical strike on your own nature. You took the parts of you that threatened the attachment bond, the boisterous part, the demanding part, the one that felt too much, and you drove them underground. Not because they were wrong, but because survival required it. And those exiled parts, they didn't just disappear. They formed what Jung called feeling-toned complexes, clusters of emotion and memory that operate like sub-personalities inside you. They have their own agendas, their own voices, their own ways of sabotaging your life when you're not looking. Maybe you have a success complex that forces you to chase achievements that mean nothing to you, because somewhere deep down, a voice is still trying to earn your father's approval. Maybe you have a caretaker complex that won't let you rest, because the little girl in you learned that her worth was measured by how much she could give. These aren't just patterns, they're autonomous forces, running beneath your conscious awareness, making decisions for you that you think are yours. And the result? You achieve everything you're supposed to. You check all the boxes. You build the life that looks good from the outside, but inside there's a secret hollowness, an unexplained emptiness that no amount of success, no relationship, no distraction can fill. That emptiness isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's a signal that the energy you need to actually live, the vitality, the passion, the fire, is locked away in the unconscious. And the key to that vault is the very fear you used to exile it in the first place. You're not damaged, you're blocked. Like clouds covering the sun. The light is still there. It's just that everything you were taught to be is standing in the way of everything you actually are. The mask started as protection. You needed a way to navigate the world without getting hurt at every turn. So you built a version of yourself that could function in society. The professional, the responsible one, the person who has it together. Jung called this the persona. And it's not the enemy. It's necessary. But somewhere along the way, you forgot it was just a role. You started believing that the polished version, the one that knows what to say and how to act, that's who you really are. You stopped noticing the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And that gap, psychologists call it self-discrepancy, and it's quietly destroying you. When there's a gap between your actual self and the ideal self you're performing, your body keeps score. Depression, disappointment, a dull ache of dissatisfaction that follows you everywhere, whispering that something's off but you can't name what. And when there's a gap between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be, the dutiful version, the one who meets every expectation, your nervous system responds with anxiety, guilt, a constant low-grade panic that you're failing at being the person everyone needs you to be. Jung warned about this. He said when you can't shed the artificial personality you've created, your psyche fights back. Bad moods you can't explain. Obsessive thoughts that won't leave you alone. Phobias that seem to come out of nowhere. These aren't random. They're your unconscious screaming that it can't breathe under the weight of who you're pretending to be. The mask protects you from rejection, but it also keeps you from intimacy, from purpose, from the kind of life that actually feels like yours. You lose what Jung called internal spaciousness, the room inside yourself to hold your own contradictions, to be both strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, loving and angry. And the tighter the mask gets, the smaller you become, until one day you realize you've spent so much energy maintaining the performance that there's nothing left for actually living. The persona isn't the problem. The identification with it is. The moment you forget you're playing a role is the moment you lose access to everything real. So where did all those exiled parts go? The anger you swallowed, the desire you shamed, the ambition you were told was selfish, the wildness you were told to tame. They didn't vanish. They sank into the shadow. And here's what most people don't understand. The shadow isn't just a storage bin for your rejected traits. It's alive. It has its own will, its own agency. It operates beneath your awareness, making moves you don't see until it's too late. That sudden rage that erupts out of nowhere when someone crosses a small boundary. That's not random. That's your shadow speaking. The envy that floods you when someone else succeeds. That's your buried ambition screaming from the basement. The anxiety that grips you before you tell the truth. That's the part of you that learned speaking up was dangerous. You think you're in control of your life. You think you're making conscious choices based on what you value, what you want, what makes sense. But Jung had a warning. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You're not choosing. You're being chosen by the parts of you that were never integrated. And the more you've rejected them, the more primitive they've become. The more rigid your persona, the more dangerous your shadow. Because here's the mechanism. When you exile something, you don't just bury it. You give it power. You turn it into an autonomous force that hijacks your reactions, sabotages your relationships, undermines your goals. It shows up as projection. You hate in others what you can't accept in yourself. It shows up as self-sabotage. You destroy the very things you say you want because some part of you was taught wanting is wrong. Jung called shadow integration the redemption of the devil. Not because the shadow is evil, but because you've made it the villain in your story when it's actually the hero waiting to be reclaimed. The anger you fear, it's your boundary. The desire you've shamed, it's your vitality. The aggression you've buried, it's your power to stand up and take space in the world. And the more you refuse it, the more it controls you from the darkness. The only way out is through. The only way to stop being run by your unconscious is to turn around and face it. When you start facing your shadow, when you begin pulling back the mask, something happens that feels like falling apart. And everyone around you will tell you it's a breakdown, that you're regressing, that you need to get it together. But the alchemists who inspired Jung had a name for this stage. They called it the nigredo, the blackening, the necessary death before rebirth. This is the phase where everything you thought you knew about yourself dissolves. Relationships that once felt stable suddenly feel suffocating. Work that once gave you purpose feels hollow. The identity you spent decades building starts crumbling, and you can't hold it together anymore no matter how hard you try. And here's what no one tells you. This isn't failure. This is the process working. The nigredo is the psyche's refusal to keep living the lie. It's your unconscious stripping away everything inauthentic so that something real can finally emerge. The depression you feel isn't pathology. It's your soul saying, "I will not pretend anymore." The confusion isn't a sign you're lost. It's a sign you're finally letting go of the map that was never yours. Jung understood that transformation doesn't happen through insight alone. It happens through fire, through the sacred chaos of decomposition. You have to let the old self die before the whole self can be born. And that death feels like grief, like rage, like standing in the rubble of everything you worked so hard to become. People will leave during this phase. They'll say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. Old identities will collapse. You'll feel exposed, raw, like you've lost your footing and can't find solid ground. And you'll be tempted to run back to the mask, back to the performance, back to the version of you that kept everyone comfortable. But this darkness is not the enemy. It's the doorway. The nigredo must be consciously endured. You can't skip it. You can't numb your way through it. You have to stand in the fire and let it burn away everything that was never you. Because on the other side of this death is the only life that was ever truly yours. So how do you actually do this work? How do you move from knowing about the shadow to integrating it? You start by pulling your projections back. Because the traits you judge most harshly in others are almost always the ones you've disowned in yourself. Make a list. 5 people who trigger you. 5 traits that make your blood boil. Arrogance, laziness, manipulation, coldness, selfishness. Now ask yourself the question you don't want to answer. Where does this live in me? Not in theory, not abstractly. Specifically, when have you acted this way? Where does that impulse show up in your life, even in the smallest, quietest ways? This isn't about shame. It's about reclaiming power. Because as long as you're projecting, you're at war with yourself. But when you reclaim the trait, when you say, "Yes, this is also me," you stop being triggered. You become whole. Next, engage with what Jung called active imagination. This is where you initiate a dialogue with the part of yourself you've been running from. Find a quiet space. Let your mind settle. Then invite the shadow to take form. Your rage, your desire, your grief, your ambition. Give it a face. Let it become a figure you can see, and then let it speak. Don't censor. Don't judge. Just listen. Ask it questions. Why are you here? What do you want from me? What happens when I keep ignoring you? Write down what comes. Because often what you feared was a monster is just a part of you that's been exiled so long it had to scream to be heard. And this practice, this dialogue, it activates something in your brain, the same networks that allow your deepest drives to finally gain conscious representation. You're not just thinking about the shadow, you're meeting it. But integration isn't just mental. It has to show up in your body, in your choices, in the real world. Jung called this embodiment, and it starts small, micro-revolutions that reclaim pieces of your authenticity. If you've suppressed your assertiveness, practice saying no without explaining yourself. If you've hidden your creativity, spend 15 minutes making something terrible, something useless, just because it feels good. If you've buried your playfulness, do something silly in public. These aren't trivial acts. Each one heats up the crucible of your transformation. Each one brings more of you into consciousness through action, through risk, through courage. You're not becoming someone else. You're removing the barriers between you and who you've always been. There's a reason Jung worked with symbols and rituals, because the unconscious doesn't speak the language of logic. It speaks in images, in metaphors, in acts that carry weight beyond words. And when you're ready to let the old identity die, you need to mark it. You need to tell your psyche, in a language it understands, that the performance is over. Name the role you've been playing. The perfect daughter, the high achiever, the one who never needs anything, the peacekeeper. Write it down, and then write a letter to that version of yourself. Thank it for protecting you. Acknowledge what it gave you, and then say goodbye. Burn the letter, or bury it, or dissolve it in water. It doesn't matter which. What matters is the act itself, because when you burn that paper, you're signaling to your unconscious that the identity structure is being sacrificed. The mask is coming off, and there's no going back. This isn't theater. This is how transformation happens. The psyche responds to symbolic logic more than it ever will to rational thought. The ritual makes the death real in a way that thinking about it never could. But integration doesn't end with a single moment of release. It requires daily vigilance, because the shadow doesn't stay integrated through awareness alone. It demands ongoing confrontation, and that's where journaling becomes your mirror and your scalpel. Every day, you ask yourself the questions that cut through the performance. Where was I fake today? What impulse did I swallow? Who triggered me? And what does that say about me? Where did I smile when I wanted to scream? Where did I say yes when I meant no? This isn't journaling for peace. This is journaling for truth. You're tracking the moments of effective disruption, the places where the mask slipped, where the shadow tried to break through, where you felt defensive or envious or performative. And by writing it down, you create distance. You take back power from the autonomous forces running beneath your awareness. Each entry reduces the shadow's grip. Each honest confrontation frees up energy that was being used to repress, to hide, to maintain the lie. And that energy, that's life force. That's the vitality you've been missing. The ritual marks the death. The journaling ensures you stay awake to the life that's trying to emerge. So how do you know if this work is actually working? How do you know if you're becoming whole? You become less predictable. You stop saying yes out of obligation. You stop performing emotions you don't feel. People who knew the old version of you will say you've changed, and they won't always mean it kindly. But you're not interested in being who they needed you to be anymore. You're interested in being real. You become more polarizing. Some people will be drawn to you with an intensity that surprises you, because your truth gives them permission to stop hiding too. Others will pull away, uncomfortable with the fact that you're no longer playing the role. And that's okay, because your choices now come from a different place, not from what you think you should do, but from what Jung called inner necessity. a strange inevitability that rises from deep within, guiding you toward what's actually yours. You stop collapsing when someone criticizes you. You can hear hard truths without your ego shattering, because you're not holding up a fragile mask anymore. You know your light. You know your darkness. You've sat with both, and that self-acceptance creates a groundedness that doesn't need constant validation from the outside world. And you feel more alive, not in some shallow motivational way, but in the sense that you're finally inhabiting your own body, your own voice, your own desire. You laugh louder, you cry deeper, you speak more clearly. The energy that was once spent on repression is now available for creation, for connection, for the life you were always meant to live. You'll still struggle. You'll still fall into old patterns. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. Jung never promised transcendence. He promised wholeness. And wholeness includes contradiction. It includes imperfection. It includes holding light and shadow without fragmentation. You're not broken. You never were. You were just divided. And healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about accepting the full spectrum of who you are. This is the privilege of a lifetime, to stop performing and finally begin living as the whole, unrepeatable individual you were always meant to be. Thank you for exploring this with me. If this resonated, I invite you to like and subscribe. This work deepens when we're not alone in it. Share this with someone who might recognize themselves here, and leave a comment with your reflections. Thank you for doing this consciousness work. See you in the next exploration.